This time on Watchers of Tomorrow. Tomorrow on Watchers of Tomorrow. 9 weeks ago on Watchers of Tomorrow. 300 years from now on Watchers of Tomorrow.
Hello everyone, welcome to Watchers of Tomorrow, the sci-fi review, critique, whatever show where we put the humanities back into science fiction. I am Gepwin, and I am joined as always by my friend and co-host Dr. Isix.
Hi.
And since this is our special end of / between season show, we have special guest star Jessie Gender, who you should go check out on YouTube.
Hi, nice to see you, or meet you, or whatever we're doing in this ethereal internet space.
Disembodied voices.
Yes.
Yeah, if we say see each other, people imagine that we sit around a table with microphones like professionals.
I mean, is that not what we're doing? I'm totally in the room with you right now. That's 100% happening.
Yes, and that room is on the moon as well. It's pretty sweet.
It's great. My coffee's just floating around. It's fun.
Now, if you have seen Jessie's videos, you will know that they are very Star Trek related, which unfortunately we don't get a chance to do since we do Star Trek in the main series. So
dang it.
This time we're covering a movie that Jessie picked.
And I'm sorry that I made you guys sit through this 3-hour epic.
No, it's an epic that I enjoy, so yeah. I was okay with that.
Well, each bit of it is only about half an hour because it's 6 different things. So technically it's just 6 half-hour TV shows.
Yeah, that you're just skipping through like you have analysis paralysis and not sure which one you want to watch.
So it's basically me anytime I open up Amazon Prime. So
yeah, it's just recreating the Netflix experience. You know, I'm not sure. Well, as long as it has Tom Hanks in it, I guess I'm probably fine.
Hey, all of these do.
Though since people probably already read the episode description, we are covering the 2012 movie Cloud Atlas, which is a beast of a thing.
Yes, it's like I said, it's a particular one. I know you guys, when you guys asked me to do this, you said pick your favorite sci-fi movie, and I'm not 100% sure if this is my favorite, but it's definitely up there because I find it so particularly fascinating, and I also think, and we'll get into this in the discussion, but I also just think it resonates with me as a Star Trek fan in just a lot of ways, and so that's why I thought it'd be great to discuss here.
I know, I recognized some similar messaging going through, which we can talk about. It was a really interesting pick, all of the Wachowskis movies. Yeah, no,
I particularly love the Wachowskis so much. I mean, not just because, for me, as a trans person, it's always awesome to see, yes, there's trans people out there directing and making stories and doing, big budget stuff. So that's something that I have an affinity for. But I also just, a lot of their movies are, just speak to me about, they're always talking about connection and finding humanity in others and cutting across differences. Like Sense8, which is one of my favorite TV shows, too, does that. And so I just particularly just love these filmmakers in all of their successes and their flaws, and they certainly have had many flaws over the years, but even the flaws are interesting. They're not just bad. Even the second 2 Matrix movies are, not great, but they're fascinating pieces of work. So,
well, one of my favorite sci-fi movies is their Speed Racer. So
yeah, no,
I'm right
underrated.
there.
Yeah.
Very underrated film.
It's been ages since I've seen that. Hey, Kevin, I'm going to add that to my list.
It's definitely worth it.
As we've been alluding to, this film was both written and directed by the Wachowski sisters and Tom Tykwer. So 3 directors, 3 writers, and 3 directors.
And you mentioned Sense8. That's something they've worked on together as well.
Yep. I think Lana... They both worked on it. I think it kind of ended with just Lana working on it towards the end of that series, but they definitely had a hand in that. And like I alluded to, that series is easily probably in my top 10 science fiction shows of all time and top shows of all time. So
I still haven't gotten a chance to see that one. I need to get around to it.
I've not seen the entirety of it myself, but I saw a span of episodes and I was like, wow, this is fantastic. Why is there not more stuff out there like this? This is great.
I know. It's so good. There's a whole episode we could do just on Sense8 if we ever get the chance.
We might have to eventually.
It's on my list as well. So
This particular movie was based on a 2004 novel by the same name by David Mitchell, which I have not read. I understand a lot of people prefer the novelization based on the reviews I was watching, but I don't have a point of comparison.
Neither do I, so works for me.
and I've not read it either, but I've seen folks talking about the comparing it to the movie and such before, so I guess I might have some insight there.
And then that book was itself inspired by a piece of music by the same name, which is some kind of experimental atonal half-noise music that's kind of interesting if you look it up on YouTube.
Some sort of music concrete?
Yeah, sort of. Now, I'm just going to list out all of the main actors in this movie because it is a star-studded cast, but listing them with characters doesn't make any sense because each of them plays at least 3 different roles.
Yeah, I was joking before we started this with you guys. I'm like, I'm very sorry for you having to do the synopsis on this thing.
So, this movie stars, in no particular order, Tom Hanks, Halle Berry, Jim Broadbent, Hugo Weaving, Jim Sturgis, Donna Bay, Ben Winshaw, James Darcy, I'm losing steam here, Zhao Zhen, Keith David, David Gatsey, Susan Sarandon, and Hugh Grant.
There's so many.
A whole bunch of other people.
Yeah.
Yes.
As well as various extras and whatnot. These are the main people you will have, heard of.
And I think this was also right before, to pick out one in particular, Ben Winshaw became really, really big. So, because I think he didn't become big until, I think around the time he was in Skyfall, James Bond. So it was cool to see, like, oh yeah, hey, Ben Winshaw, look at you.
He had one of the best story arcs in this one.
Yeah, no, his is the most tragic and really kind of the one that kind of connects all of them in a lot of ways. So, I mean, they're all connected, but his kind of echoes across all the stories and with his music.
So we're going to jump into the synopsis here. I'm going to make a note that as presented in both the novel and the film, this is 6 different stories that intercut with each other at various points, which would be impossible to summarize in that context without becoming so super confusing. So I have decided to split them up and just run through them in chronological order. So we're starting with the oldest story in the timeline and going forth into the future timeline by the end.
It might also be worth noting that, like, multiple actors play multiple characters throughout the film. That does play, like, an important role in, like, how you read this, but it's just, that's going to be so difficult to...
Yeah, well, that's kind of my other point, is each story I'm going to re-summarize which actors are playing the main characters, and any actor that shows up as a side character, I'm just going to use the actor's name instead of the character name, because I feel like that makes more sense, because the actor that plays the character is more important than the character themselves in a lot of these side characters.
Mm-hmm, mm-hmm.
Because there's a connection going on throughout all of this.
All right, if we're ready to go...
Let's do it.
So where are we starting, Gepwin?
We start with old Tom Hanks against a starry sky. Winds like these, full of voices, your ancestors howling at you to bring you the stories. Little on the nose, but...
I know, but I gotta say, that opening, there's always moments for me when I always appreciate a moment when you get like this feeling of like mystery and intensity with cinema, and just that opening always gets me. I'm like, oh, I feel so like engrossed, and it feels very much like, oh, I'm about to like sit around a campfire and hear a story, and it just, that opening just it gives me chills every time I see it.
It is a very nice one. I will say, I don't want to dwell too much on some of the cinematic flaws of the movie because I do feel like it had a few missteps, but one thing that did get me a little bit is all of the future speak is this weird sort of half English nonsense that kind of took me out of some of the actual good dialogue they had in those scenes. And the intro uses that as well, and it can be a little hard to follow the first time.
Yeah, it gets better the more you go, and speaking on that, since we probably won't get to it later, is the one problem I have with that is it's kind of like a very one-to-one language change. It's like, oh, this means this, or I'm trying to remember one of the words, the true, and it's just the word true, and it's they don't really dive in too much of the how the language would have actually changed over the eons. It's just sort of like, yeah, this word is now this word. So there's no like etymology there.
Yeah, it's a very beyond Thunderdome, the long, long ago kind of English.
Yeah, exactly. So it's a bit disappointing, but, roll with it, I guess. Yeah.
I'm having a little bit of, I guess, flashbacks to Clockwork Orange and some of the way they spoke in that.
Yes, that one, that at least is a bit forgivable there, because it's, that's like slang. So slang I can feel like being one-to-one, whereas this is like supposedly an entire culture and language that's built up around, however long it's been since the fall of humanity, our human civilization. And it's still just sort of like, they just, they say words slightly differently. It's not like revealing too much culture. So it's like, they're primitive, so they say words weird.
Now, that's way in the future. Our first story begins in 1849, starring Tom Hanks as Dr. Henry Goose, Jim Sturgis as Adam Ewing, and Jim Broadbent as Captain Molyneux, and David Jessie as Atua. This is my favorite name in the entire thing.
Yes. It's a good name,
Same.
Yeah.
Though my autocorrect decided to keep changing it to Otto.
I know, it was horrible. Autocorrect on this is awful. Adam Ewing meets one Dr. Goose sifting through sand on a beach. He's apparently hunting teeth because he believes this used to be a cannibal feeding ground, and that he can sell these teeth for a good price per half pound.
They were eaten alive, but now they're being chewed by the modern world.
Adam is in the Pacific to collect a probably slave-related, though it is never explicitly said, contract from Hugh Grant on behalf of his father-in-law, Hugo Weaving. They discuss Hugo Weaving's writings over dinner as they concern the order of things, namely why all the white dudes get to enjoy a nice meal, while Keith David and a few other black men in tattoo makeup are very happy to serve them their meals.
Yeah. There's a great line in this scene that I actually wrote down that I love, that the main character we're following through, what's his name? The guy who gets sick? I'm blanking.
Adam.
Adam, yeah. He has a great line that says, if God created the world, the hard part is figuring out what we can change and what remains sacred and valuable. And then we immediately cut to like a slave like punishment, like whipping. And it was just a great way to sort of set off the themes of this movie about like talking about how we sort of see these systems of oppression as just part of the quote-unquote natural order of things. And really, you just see throughout all the stories like how those systems of oppression just change and manipulate over time, but how people just take them as as sacred at the time. And I just thought that was just a great line to sort of set us up for this theme in this scene.
Later on, they take a tour of some fields where they see a slave, played by David Gatsi, this is Atua, as we will find out later, being whipped. This shock and the heat causes Adam to pass out. Later, he is being attended to by Dr. Goose, where we see a birthmark on Adam's chest shaped like a comet. This becomes important later.
Yes.
Goose tells him that he has contracted a parasite known as the Polynesian worm, but luckily he is one of the few doctors around who knows how to treat this illness and begins giving him medication.
How convenient.
Adam and Goose take a ship back to San Francisco, where Adam is quarantined below deck despite his condition being non-contagious. There, he finds that he is unintentional cabin mates with Atua, the slave that he saw being whipped a second ago, who has stowed away on the ship in order to escape his enslavement. Adam is not very happy about this to begin with, but says he will help Atua since he knows that turning him in would be the same thing as having him killed, which is a point made rather dramatically by Atua holding a knife to his own throat during the conversation.
I'm with Atua here, yeah.
If you got to make a point come across, it's a good way to do it.
Adam begins sneaking Atua food from his meals with the captain and doctor. After he learns that Atua used to be an accomplished sailor, he decides to tell the captain about him, hoping that his worth as a crewman will prevent him from being punished as a stowaway. The captain agrees to test Atua by having him single-handedly lower the mainsails, which is actually something that's almost impossible to do on old-timey sailing ships. That this was apparently a trick, as he orders his first mate to pull out a gun and prepare to shoot him while he's climbing the mast. But Adam, upset at this, knocks the gun aside, saving Atua's life just as he lowers the sails by swinging down to the deck, which is a feat so impressive the captain decides to immediately take him on as a crew member.
It's just a complete 180 there.
Yeah.
It was a good scene, but it's like, shoot him. Oh, never mind.
Wait, he's better than all my other crew combined. Huh. I guess we can keep him.
Yeah, and I'm also like, aren't you worried you're going to like shoot your really expensive like rigging there?
Yeah, or, hit the wrong bit and...
Yeah, putting holes in your sails like that, it's not going to be good.
I feel like they just shoot him on the ground. It'd be much less dangerous to your ship.
Atua continues his friendship with Adam, trying to nurse him back to health as it becomes increasingly obvious that Dr. Goose may not have his best interests at heart, as he is continuously stealing from him and coveting a key that he wears around his neck.
You mean the dude we met holding a bunch of teeth is not a good guy? What? I'm so shocked.
But he's played by Tom Hanks, who's the nicest man in Hollywood.
This is true. Subverting expectations.
He's like literally pulling one of the buttons off his shirt and then like little jeweled things. So he's like, I'm going to pocket this, yes.
One stormy night, Atua finds Goose finally trying to finish off a very, very ill Adam. They struggle for a bit, and just before Goose can finally kill off Adam and steal his remaining belongings, Atua hits him over the head with the very gold-filled chest that he has been coveting, saving Adam's life. Symbolism.
Yes. Literally beating you over the head with symbolism.
Atua helps Adam return home to his wife and family, and Adam decides to confront his father-in-law, burning the slave contract in front of him, before saying that he was saved by an escaped slave and he cannot be part of this anymore, and in fact he and his wife are moving to the East Coast to become abolitionists.
Hooray!
No more power. You have no more power over us. We're out of here. We're going to change the world. Ha!
This angers Daddy Hugo Weaving, who warns them that trying to upend the natural order will do nothing but cause them pain and horribleness, and anything they do will be nothing more than a drop in the ocean. With Adam replying, well, what is the ocean but a multitude of drops?
The theme.
Yep.
Which also, this does happen near the end of the movie, even though this is just the end of our first synopsis bit, so.
No, they all kind of, yeah, they all these like nice thematic bits just coalesce in that really powerful ending montage that this is but a drop in the sea of. If my metaphor worked there.
Yeah, if we I'm going to go join up with those who are working for the same goal, and we're gonna change the world. Just you see here. Now, if I recall, this is also at the end of the book as well. So, very.
Next, we are in 1936 with Ben Wenshaw playing Robert Frobisher, James Darcy playing Rufus Sixsmith, and Jim Broadbent playing Vivian Ayres. We begin with voiceover from Frobisher reading letters that he's written to his lover Sixsmith. We see a comet-shaped birthmark on Frobisher's quite naked body as he and Sixsmith are woken up by men hammering on their hotel room door. This causes Frobisher to dress and dismiss himself via the window.
As one does.
He announces through his letters his intention to ingratiate himself with one Vivian Ayres, who is a genius composer who, because of illness, has not yet been composing his, great English works or whatnot. He plans to become his assistant and then become a famous composer in his own right, to basically shove it in the face of his dismissive father. I can relate.
Yes.
By way of an interview, Vivian dum-de-dums a tune that he's been thinking over to Frobisher so that he can write it down, but when asked to play it back, it sounds awful.
A little bit, yeah.
So, and especially because he gives Frobisher like all of 5 seconds to get it down to.
Yeah, and he explicitly asks for like key signatures and what's our timing here. I need details.
I also don't know necessarily music well enough, but it sounds like he's playing it like exactly as it was dum-de-dummed.
Yeah, no, he does a really good job given the minuscule amount of time that he's given. Obviously, he doesn't appreciate any of that work. He's like, get him out of my sight.
Yes, he's about to dismiss him when Frobisher suddenly starts playing a very beautiful tune on the piano that Vivian declares to have been the melody that he meant all along.
Of course, yes, no, yes.
Yes, that was exactly what I was thinking. Yes, for sure.
Yes, of course, yes, no, that's perfect.
Frobisher spends the next while in good spirits, helping Vivian write his music while also working on his own compositions and reading the published journals of Adam Ewing.
Wait a moment, that was the guy we saw last time.
Yes.
Connection, yes.
He and Vivian present their work, which they are calling Eternal Recurrence, because we're still being subtle, to a German composer. This is mostly an excuse for Hugo Weaving to show up as a evil German dude, and also to enforce that Frobisher is fairly ignorant of the political situation leading up to World War II.
Remember, we're in the 30s.
And of course, Hugo Weaving, just because it's a Wachowski film, Hugo Weaving has to be the bad guy.
Yeah.
In fact, there's a couple actors that are bad guys throughout the entire thing.
Yes, but Hugo Weaving stays consistently a jerk throughout the entire thing. I think Tom Hanks goes from like good to bad, other characters change allegiances, but Hugo Weaving is always a jerk. So there's one consistent thing in the world.
Hugo Weaving is always the main villain, and then Hugh Grant is always like a side villain.
Exactly.
When he shows up.
If there's one constant in this entire universe, it's that Hugo Weaving is evil. And Hugh Grant is slightly less evil.
Hugh Grant is more used car salesman evil. Hugo Weaving's more shoot in the face evil.
Exactly.
Sometime later, Vivian hears Frobisher playing his own original work that he calls the Cloud Atlas Sextet. More subtle.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah.
They talk about this beautiful composition and what it means to Frobisher until Frobisher misreads the situation and moves in to kiss Vivian, which makes Vivian laugh in his face, prompting him to the revelation that Vivian looked into Frobisher's past, knows that he has a very sordid reputation, and decided that because of this he can basically blackmail him into stealing his obvious talents for himself, holding him hostage with a threat to ruin any chance he would have at a musical career.
And again, going back to what we were talking about in the last story, here's the system of oppression of this story about like how, homosexual people are, and queer people just in general are often sort of having to hide themselves. And when they do reveal themselves and come out of the closet, especially at this time that this story takes place, it's a very dangerous act. And then is just immediately rebuked. And then not only is he rebuked, which would, be painful enough, but, it happens. It's immediately turned around on him and says, like, no, I'm going to essentially, just make you my slave in a way, and just can totally ruin your career based around this one aspect of yourself. And it's just a complete 180 and a completely painful turn of events that, as for me as a queer person, that scene in particular just always just guts me.
It's also really well presented in this one because it's not only a turnaround, it's I always knew this, and this thing that you thought was like a good working relationship has actually been me manipulating you for my own ends the entire time.
In the dialogue, leading up to this particular moment, while he's sort of like presenting Cloud Atlas Sextet there, Vivian's like, this is obviously a good collaboration between us. Yeah, my name should be on this. Yes. It's like, yeah, I see where this is going.
And there's even an element, too, that you could read it, and I always go back and forth every time I watch this about whether or not this is actually the case, but you could read it that he's, the doctor is actually having feelings for Frobisher, but has, suppressed it for so long that he's sort of very closeted and has a lot of internalized homophobia. And so when that moment does happen, he just sort of instantly rejects both Frobisher, but also that aspect of himself, in order to be like, no, this is more important to me. This power and this being successful is really what matters more to me in this era. So you could read it as just a pure manipulation right from the top. But I there's an element of me that wants to read it as like there's a lot of internalized homophobia on the good doctor's part.
I'd have to agree because he's only, basically, laying out what the rules are from this point on forward at this point when he actually, had already done the research on Robert before this point, but had been, not making it explicit.
And also there should be a mention too that the Cloud Atlas Sextet is actually part of the score throughout the entire film and cuts across the entire work.
Yes, they use it. They bring it up several times, both in diegetic and non-diegetic instances through the rest of the movie. Frobisher is very obviously frustrated by the fact that he's now basically enslaved to Vivian, and starts to plan an escape so that he can work on his masterpiece by himself. When packing, he decides to grab Vivian's old service pistol for reasons that he says he doesn't even know. Vivian interrupts his packing and tries to steal the Cloud Atlas, and in the scuffle over the music, Frobisher shoots him, as it turns out very non-fatally, but now he is a wanted man. Frobisher moves into a seedy hotel to finish his work, continuing to write to Sixsmith, who decides that he needs to go into London to find him. Frobisher finishes his masterpiece, and even does see Sixsmith looking for him at a monument that he says he frequents, but decides to hide himself, instead getting one last look before returning to his hotel to finish his work and shooting himself just before Sixsmith finds him in his room.
That whole sequence is another moment that just this story in particular, just because I am part of the queer community, that whole sequence just always gut punches me. Just that moment where he says, I don't think it was a coincidence that I saw you first, and that's why he was able to just get a last look at him before he went and killed himself. Just it's such a beautiful moment, and yet such a painful and tragic moment, because you just wish that it had turned out any other way. You're just like, I wish you had seen each other, because I feel like if that had happened, you wouldn't have killed yourself. And it's just, I don't know. It's such a painful moment for myself, and just having known that feeling myself personally, and then also knowing a lot of friends who, not just in the queer community, but elsewhere, but especially within the queer community, who have gone through similar things and sometimes not always won that battle, it's a particularly powerful scene that I think is very beautifully portrayed, but just so painfully portrayed here.
I have to agree.
This storyline and love affair is really kind of the emotional core of the entire narrative arc of all of the movie.
Yeah, I'm a little choked up right now. Don't worry about me.
Next, we are in 1973 with Halle Berry playing Louisa Ray, and James D'Arcy again playing Sixsmith, but this time much older.
Which I think is the only character who appears in multiple stories. I believe. It's the only time that you get close enough that one of the characters is still alive. Louisa Ray is fleeing a party where she was apparently interviewing a rather boorish man who will not leave her alone as she runs to the elevator. Once in the elevator, it stops due to a power outage, and she winds up trapped with Rufus Sixsmith. After a few hours, and it getting hot, Louisa removes her jacket to deal with the heat, and Sixsmith sees that she has a very familiar comet-shaped birthmark on her shoulder.
So another trend continues.
Mm-hmm, yes. It's almost as if there's thematic connection between the stories, yes.
This connection prompts him to ask if she would be willing to take on a story, even if it meant the possibility of going to prison to protect her sources. The elevator starts moving again, and they part ways, but not before Louisa gives Sixsmith her card in case he needs anything. Back when people needed to give each other phone numbers.
Well, people still just hand out business cards. It just, it has their Twitch channel on it nowadays.
Exactly. If you need to reach out to me about your government secrets, please reach me at my Twitch.
Sixsmith spends the night reading old letters from Frobisher and watching Hugh Grant on TV talking about America's nuclear future. This seems to make up his mind about the need to call Louisa and asks for help. She arrives and is invited up to his room just before Hugo Weaving shows up to shoot Sixsmith in the head, planting the gun to make it appear as a suicide and taking a bundle of papers.
Dang it, Hugo Weaving? Not again.
Always with the evil Hugo.
When no one answers the door, Louisa gets a manager to let her in, and they find the body along with the bundle of Frobisher's old letters, which she takes. After a brief aside to track down Frobisher's music to connect more stuff up, she decides to check the nuclear plant that Sixsmith was associated with, and she gets a tour from obviously evil CEO Hugh Grant.
Dang it, Hugh Grant!
Is it just the H? Is it having an H at the top of your name? I guess Halle Berry isn't evil. I don't know.
As soon as Louisa is left alone for a moment, she finds Sixsmith's old office and starts poking around, where she is discovered by Tom Hanks, nuclear physicist.
And finally playing an actually friendly human.
Instead of turning her in, he feels an inexplicable connection to this woman that he's never met before. and they talk about Carlos Castaneda and mystical past life stuff that he says he doesn't believe in, except for this unexplained feeling that he somehow knows her.
Like maybe we met in a past life.
He decides to give her the report that Sixsmith wanted to give her, even though he knows that it is probably going to turn out badly for him one way or another.
I'm sure it'll be fine.
Tom Hanks gets on a plane, and Hugo Weaving follows Louisa's car.
Yeah, getting on a plane's fine. Everything's going to be great. He's just going to Korea, wasn't it?
Yeah, something like that. Yeah, it'll be totally okay.
Hugo Weaving rams Louisa's car off of a bridge at the same time that a bomb goes off in Tom Hanks's plane.
No!
Oh, no!
Who would have thought?
Louisa comes to underwater, but makes it home understandably freaked out and with all of her evidence at the bottom of a river. Back at home, she is greeted by Keith David, who is the head of security at the nuclear plant, but is here to help her because apparently her father saved his life back when he was in the army. He reveals that the oil lobby is actually the one who set up this nuclear power plant, and they want it to intentionally fail, causing a disaster that will ruin the reputation of nuclear power as an alternative to oil in America.
You know, I feel like it's a very evil plot that feels outside of the realm of possibility, but then I think about it, I'm like, no, I could sadly see it.
Yeah. Except I think they just went through and created a bunch of astroturfed environmental organizations to ruin nuclear power anyway, which was a lot cheaper.
Yes, and less, overtly like, bwaha, villainous.
It's more subtle. Villain.
Exactly.
And this oil company is the one who has hired Hugo Weaving to kill anyone who finds out about this, including now the two of them.
I guess we're going to see him again.
Yes, they have a plan to lure Hugo Weaving out using Louisa as bait. They smash into his car as he's trying to kill her, but this does not go very smoothly and turns into a large chase through the back alleys and industrial buildings of San Francisco.
I do have to say that is such an incredibly coincidental plan. It's just like, all right, you're going to walk on the street, and I'm going to have my car just off to the side here, and we know he's going to try and run you over right here instead of, shooting you from, fairly far away.
Yeah, it's very 70s-ish sort of action movie thing going on here, and it just kind of works.
Yeah, I don't have any problem with it in the film. It's just funny to just think about it outside of that.
During this chase scene, Weaving shoots a worker's dog because she can't speak English, yells a slur at her, and then runs away.
Because Hugo Weaving is evil.
Later, he has Louisa and Keith David cornered, but he's knocked out and then killed by the woman whose dog he shot earlier.
Take that, Hugo Weaving, you dog killer.
Being an evil racist gets you killed.
Yeah.
Hooray!
If only that were always true.
Now safe, Louisa exposes the conspiracy, saving countless lives, and her young, aspiring author of A Neighbor mentions how good of a book this would all make. We now have 2012 with Jim Broadbent as Timothy Cavendish, the only main character of this particular story arc. This is also our comedy aside story arc.
Yes.
Yep. Very much so.
Cavendish is a publisher attending a literary party with his newest published author, a London gangster type played by Tom Hanks.
It makes me think echoes of Tom Cruise in Tropic Thunder.
Oh yeah.
Yeah, it's just it's not as transformative, but it's just so weird to see Tom Hanks play a street tough,
Yeah. It's just weird to have him show up with that accent and I'm doing gangstery things and mad at people and have tattoos on me knuckles. I went pirate there for a second. I don't know.
Very, very Tom Hanks,
Tom Hanks is upset that his book is not selling well and blames a critic's negative review for its poor reputation. Hanks confronts the critic, and after an exchange, this ends with him throwing the critic off of a balcony.
Wait a moment, is Tom Hanks evil again?
Well, coincidentally, Tom Hanks in interviews said this was his favorite scene of the movie.
It's one of mine too. It's weirdly cathartic in a fun way, and also sort of I'm not sure how well it reads nowadays with the hatred of critics and news culture. But it's a fun scene just to see Tom Hanks just go way over the top and just throw this guy over. Ugh.
It kind of helps that the critic is a bit of a pompous ass through it too. So
exactly. It's a fun scene. It is probably one of my favorite scenes of the movie.
Now associated with a dramatic murder, Hanks's book starts flying off of the shelves, making Cavendish a great deal of money as publisher. Unfortunately, Hanks's family, equally tough-looking London gangster people, give Cavendish a visit, demanding that he pay them the money that he owed Hanks if he does not want to be killed.
Killed or maimed a whole lot.
Cavendish does not actually have this money, which eventually leads him to asking his brother, Hugh Grant, for a cash loan. This he is none too happy about because apparently this has happened a lot.
Well, this well might be a little dry. Maybe you should move on to somebody else.
His brother eventually does agree to give him the money, but says in the meantime he needs to go somewhere to lay low.
Before we move on, I do want to point out that Timothy actually goes to Denholm, Hugh Grant's character's home, and they're hanging out by the pool or whatever it was. And Timothy kind of glances at his wife for a moment, and it's pretty clear that Denholm actually notices this before he agrees to everything.
Yeah, and it's not as important for the story, but Ben Winshaw plays the wife, Georgette.
Oh, yeah, that's right.
Just to have another actor in here, apparently. So.
Well, I also liked that, this is something, again, because of who I am, but I do like this sort of cutting across, like souls cut across gender and cut across, is problematic as it's portrayed somewhat later in the film, cut across like racial divides as well, and that we all have the same human soul.
The core us, is still there, even if the trappings on the outside are varying.
Exactly. It's not like we are always, there's not like a male soul or female soul, it's just a human soul, which I particularly like. And like I said, there's problems with how that's portrayed in a racial sense later on, but I do kind of enjoy it.
Cavendish spends his time on a train reading a novel, Half-Lives, a Louisa Ray mystery.
By someone named Javier. Wait a moment, there's a Javier in the last section.
He then recognizes that he is near a place that he spent some time in his youth with the love of his life, apparently. He goes to the house that she lived in, remembering when he was caught by her parents, which shows us his own comet-shaped birthmark.
Yes, on his leg.
Where he comically grabs a cat and gets forced out of a window, never to return.
Yeah, keeping it PC, I guess, here, or PG, I should say. That scene is quite hilarious.
It's probably one of the two parts of the film that got it that R rating.
Yes, exactly. Yes.
In the present, he kind of creepily stalks this older woman who we assume is the same woman with what I can only assume is her new family, debating whether to introduce himself and disturb this life she seems very happy with and maybe hasn't even thought of him in years, but, we're not supposed to think about that, I think.
Yeah, shush, don't bring that up. It's a cute moment,
A little creepy, but yeah, cute, yeah.
He decides to continue on and reaches what he assumes to be the hotel that his brother sent him to. He signs in and goes to bed only to wake up to see Hugo Weaving in angry female makeup, confiscating all of his belongings.
Wait, Hugo Weaving's a thief now?
Doing her best Nurse Ratched impression.
He slowly discovers that he is now trapped in an abusive nursing home. He tries to storm out, but this is stopped by the gardener and other staff, and he's carried back to his room bodily.
Yeah, I'm kind of surprised that the security of this place was so light that they had to rely on the gardener to get him back inside.
Yeah, it was like all he has to do is like hop a low-hanging like fence thing there.
That night, he sneaks out and calls his brother, discovering to his dismay that his brother not only knows what's happening, but owns the facility he's now trapped in, and this is payback for him knowing that he slept with his wife a few years ago.
Dun dun dun.
Cavendish eventually discovers that he's not the only one in this facility who's unhappy and feels trapped, and he joins a small group of other residents who are planning an escape.
Including the adorable Mr. Meeks.
They hatch a plan. Pretending to be a doctor working for the home care facility, they inform a family member that one of them is dead, prompting a visit.
Something about a will.
Once the family arrives, they steal their car, have some hilarious hijinks driving around and having to pick up one straggling member of the crew, before crashing through the main gate and escaping.
Come on, Mr. Meeks.
I just want to see in one movie where like a car is about to crash through a gate and it just hits the gate and doesn't go anywhere. It's like, well.
Afterward, they celebrate their escape in a Scottish pub, where the patrons are watching a football match. Then they are found by the home's staff. They enlist the pub's help by telling them that they're being attacked by these English buggers and instilling a bar fight.
The English, the English team had just beat the Scottish team as well, so they're a little antsy.
They all escape, and Cavendish makes his way back to his lost love, apparently reconnecting, and the two of them finally get to be together as he writes a screenplay about his experiences.
Just sort of yada-yadaing the getting back together.
Yeah, next scene. It's like, I shall run. Next scene. They're together. All done.
Yay!
Yay! It's all good, yeah.
Now, I will point out that they didn't quite resolve the stuff with the gangsters or something like that, but apparently in the book they actually do sort out what the specifics there happened, so...
I will say, this storyline, while I do enjoy it for its sort of comedic effect, it's probably the one that works the least for me. I think there's lots of funny bits in it, but I think it's probably the least powerful of all of them.
Yeah, overall it's a bit weak there.
Especially in the resolution, it's just sort of like, yeah, it's all good now.
Well, that was a ghastly adventure. Now everything's fine.
Now we are in 2144 with Donna Bay as Somni 451, James Darcy as the Archivist, and Jim Sturgis as Haijo Chang, which is another horrible autocorrect name.
Yes. I just called him Chang in my notes.
Somni 451 is being interviewed by a company archivist regarding an incident that she was involved in. Somni is a fabricant, which is not explicitly described in the movie, but seems to be some sort of cloned slave class of attractive young Asian women.
Yeah, and we see like different versions of her later on in this story, so it's kind of implied that she's, a clone of some sort.
Your face, multitudes of the same, vision across, almost like Vivian's dream from earlier.
Mm-hmm.
She describes a typical 24-hour cycle in her life, being woken up automatically from sleep pods with stimulants, then reporting to a futuristic cafe serving consumers, then taking a liquid meal laced with sedatives that puts her back to sleep in the pod. The only thing they have to look forward to is something called exaltation, where once a year a star is stamped on their slave collar, and after 12 of these are accumulated, they are sent to the surface to live with the consumers.
Oh, that seems like a wonderful end to things, doesn't it?
Exactly, I finally get to be a consumer. Yay, capitalism. Isn't it wonderful?
Yeah. I've ascended to mediocrity, I guess.
This was Somni's norm until one of her sister fabricants, Yona 939, obtained some sort of key that she used to wake up Somni early, where she sees Yuna being raped by their manager.
Oh dear.
Yeah.
He passes out because he likes to drink their liquid supplement stuff, and Yuna shows Somni a video player that she found in the Lost and Found. It plays a clip from a movie starring Tom Hanks playing Cavendish storming out of the nursing home.
Wait a moment, this is the ghastly ordeal of Timothy Cavendish.
I will not be subjected to criminal abuse.
Later on in the restaurant, a customer humiliates Yuna, which she then hits him for, quotes the end of the movie.
I will not be subjected to criminal abuse. Sorry, I just gotta say it a billion times. In honor of the film.
Excellent.
She grabs a little girl's remote control and runs to the elevator, but before it gets there, the boss uses a remote control to detonate her slave collar, blowing up her carotid artery and killing her kind of painfully.
Ugh.
Fun.
Sometime later, Somni awakes early again to find a man standing over the corpse of the manager. This is Haicho Chang, and he is there to take her away with him.
Well, at least that jerk face is not out of the picture.
I mean, I always love it when just a guy just randomly appears and sweeps me away.
That was also Hugh Grant, for people paying attention to which evil character he is.
He's the one on the floor now.
Somni has her slave collar removed, revealing a comet-shaped birthmark. And Haicho takes her to an apartment building where she studies, learning about the world she was not allowed to know, and finally getting to see the rest of the movie about Cavendish and his nursing home adventures, as well as reading the works of Alexander Solzhenitsyn. Nope.
Something like that. Do you think she had the same reaction we did to the end of the movie? It's like, oh, well, that was decent, but had a disappointing end there.
Maybe. Apparently this is the first movie she's ever seen, so...
Yeah, the bar is low, I guess.
Yeah. That was the best thing ever. Show me other movies, please. Did you like that one? Yeah. No.
And I know that I'm butchering his name because I looked up a pronunciation ages ago, but Alexander's work is quoted many times through the story and seems to be a central thematic influence for this movie overall.
It wouldn't be a Wachowski film without philosophy.
Somnia's time in this apartment is cut short by the authorities finding them. Haicho uses a futuristic expanding bridge thing, which this is a very specific type of technology.
Kind of reminds me of this is one of those random gadgets that James Bond just sort of has. It's like, this makes no sense why you'd have it, but it'll come important at this one plot point later, so here.
It's like Ben Winshaw just appears as Q.
Haicho uses his action movie skills to kill several of their attackers before being shot off the bridge and falling out of sight. Somnia is taken to a cell where she is pontificated at by evil Asian Hugo Weaving, who mentions the natural order of things.
There it is.
Damn it, Hugo Weaving.
She is eventually taken away by more guards, who inexplicably start shooting each other, revealing that one of them is actually Haicho.
Hooray! You're not dead. Wait, how'd you survive? You fell off like a building, like a skyscraper. What?
Yeah, because plot. This results in more action-heavy escape stuff until he finally gets her to Resistance headquarters and meets their leader, Keith David, in some sort of makeup.
Yes. Discussion for later.
I'm not even sure what they're trying to do with that one. Honestly.
Yeah, I was just like, you're sort of combining several different parts of the world together, and I guess that, would kind of make sense, but I'm confused.
Keith David wants Somni to become the figurehead of their revolution. She hesitates, but he tells Haicho to show her the eventual fate of her sisters before she makes up her mind. As it turns out, when they are ascended after their 12-year contract, the fabricants are taken to a sort of modern slaughtering yard where they are processed into liquid protein that they are then fed every day.
Ew.
Yep, and that's actually, it's hinted at jokingly in the previous story where I think he at one point jokes like, Soylent Green is people, which is a nice foreshadowing of this moment.
So she and Haicho have a carnal night together before they go out to the Rebellion Broadcast Center, where they all defend Somni as she sends out a half-hour message of unity to the world.
Her revelation.
Very, very Star Wars Rogue One.
She quotes Solskine. I was going to butcher this name a lot, I'm sorry. I'm not entirely sure even where he's from, but I have trouble with these names. From womb to tomb we are all bound to others, past and present, and by each crime and every kindness we birth our future. The army eventually gets through, killing all of the revolutionaries and capturing her. After her interview with the archivist, Somni is taken away to be executed, just like all fabricants are. But she turns to the archivist at the end, knowing she changed at least one mind with her sacrifice.
So I thought was I liked that moment as well. It was a very powerful moment, and just seeing that scene.
Why'd you do it if you're not going to change anything? Well, I think you already have.
Finally, we are 106 winters after the fall, which according to other research is about 2321.
Ah, gotcha. I was going to say, otherwise known as, 2020. Too real.
Tom Hanks is playing Zachary, and Halle Berry is playing Mironime.
I couldn't pronounce that either.
Yeah.
I'm
probably going to call her Miriam, but that's not what they say. But it's easier to pronounce.
I think you'll be forgiven on name pronunciations with this particular story.
Years after some sort of apocalypse, Zachary lives with a small tribe of valley people in Hawaii. He's watching his brother-in-law and nephew honor a grave, and he witnesses a hallucination of Hugo Weaving as their devil that they call Old Georgie.
Hugo Weaving.
Being evil again?
Reminds me of, I think it's old, like Hindu or Jainist sort of beliefs where as part of the reincarnation cycle, you could potentially be reincarnated as like an actual literal demon if you were bad enough. So,
definitely fits that bill. And I will say, he is suitably creepy in every appearance he makes in the story. I actually really love how they shoot him, where he's largely out of focus in the background as sort of this like specter, and it's every time he's on screen, it's a really fascinating watch, and just suitably just sends chills down my spine.
Yeah, and they changed the camera angle, and it's like a close up of Zachary from one angle, and then flip to a different angle where it's not even like a second later, and he's in the background of both of these shots, and it's like he's just sort of everywhere.
They do a good job with the visualizations on him. I have some critiques of the character, which I'll get to later.
Yes, for sure. But yeah, no, I particularly just enjoy in that visualization. So
he gives Zachary a warning of an approaching tribe of cannibals, allowing him to hide while they kill the other members of his family. This leaves him a little bit outcast from the rest of the village, except by his niece, who stays by him because apparently his sister told her to keep an eye on him.
Yeah, everyone you know has been killed. Sorry. We'll kind of pay attention to you.
As he watches the village goats, he sees a futuristic ship approaching. This is apparently the prescience of people who still have the technology lost to the rest of humanity and come to visit their village about twice a year. This brings Miriam to the village. Everyone except Zachary is infatuated with her. Later, though, Zachary has a weird sort of dream thing that involves all of the previous timelines.
The montage strikes.
As one has, I will say I do like the scene right before this where where everyone's just like, oh, how does your ships work? Fusion engines. And he's like, no one bothered to ask what fusion engines even were. But
yeah, it is kind of good because they're like, how's this work? Oh, fusion. Oh, fusion. Yes.
Yes, of course. Yes, fusion.
Yes, I totally understand that. It's a great little scene.
Zachary seeks out Susan Sarandon as the village elder, who has a future vision. She has like a seizure and super accurate future vision. She gives Zachary 3 predictions and tells him to trust in their god Somni.
Wait a moment. Somni, you're here as well? And you have someone who's predicting the future? Like Vivian? Holy crap. It's all coming together, man.
It's like that moment in The Hangover where Zach Galifianakis is like putting all the the pieces together.
Where's my chart?
Miriam contacts her ship to report that she's found evidence that the island's mountain is what they've been looking for, a way to possibly contact the long-lost off-world colonies, which were actually talked about in Somni's timeline as well.
Yes, the 12 states and the off-world colonies were mentioned.
Which you could, if you're one of those people that likes to have connecting stories, you could also just say like, oh, this is in the Blade Runner timeline.
Oh, yeah.
Kind of works, actually, in a weird way.
Yeah, actually.
Because everybody copies Asimov's old spacer stuff.
Yeah, that is true.
The Valley people, however, are very superstitious about the mountain and believe the devil lives there, so she can't find a guide. She approaches Zachary about her need of someone to take her up the mountain, and almost falls off of a broken bridge, as the voiceover reminds us this was the first of Susan Sarandon's future predictions. She also told him to hide, which they do just in time to avoid a patrol of cannibals.
The Konas are the name of these cannibals. And their chief, guess who their chief is?
Is it Hugo Weaving? No, dang it.
It's the other H name,
Hugh Grant.
He does have a huge mouth.
Apologies to Hugh Grant.
It's the only time he's not just being awkwardly British.
True.
This accurate future-seeing stuff freaks out Zachary a bit, but Susan Sarandon quotes him Somni's homely book, "Our lives are not our own. From womb to tomb we are connected to other people."
It's a good line.
Yeah.
Soon after, a girl in the village is stung by a fish, which, that can happen now. Don't go barefoot on the beach. And the Valley people have no cure for this. Zachary bargains with Miriam that if she uses her future medicine to save the girl, which is apparently forbidden by their society and their Starfleet-esque non-interference doctrine, that he will guide her up the cursed mountain.
Which I do wonder, it's a lot about what the Star Trek influence is on that, because that really serves no tangible purpose. Like, why wouldn't they?
I know, you're here to trade and stuff anyway, so.
Yeah, it's like they know you exist. You're talking about fusion engines, so why is that a problem? You know, so it seems like a bit of a yada yada. Yeah, Star Trek did it, so we'll do it too, sort of thing.
Yeah, a little bit.
Yeah.
Traveling together, Miriam tells Zachary what she knows about the past and the fall, which was caused by the old ones despite all of their advanced technology because they had an insatiable hunger for more that overwhelmed all things.
It's almost as if it's a capitalist critique.
Consumers overconsumed, it seems.
They continue on, eventually reaching a vertical face which they climb with Miriam's future ropes.
Just like the bridges, it's the same off-brand technology.
One of the ropes lets loose, and Zachary winds up grabbing it and holding her as Hugo Devil tries to prompt him into letting her go, as far as I can tell for no particular reason. But he remembers the second prediction and pulls her up, letting them reach the top of the mountain. Second being, hands a-bleedin', don't let go.
It's like those prophecies that's just like, you're pointless until like the exact moment you need them.
Yep. Those are my favorite kinds of prophecies. They reach the top of the mountain, which is a large observatory-type building filled with hundreds of mummified bodies.
They seem unhappy.
Zachary sees a statue of Somni and is surprised that the old ones would have worshipped his god. Miriam explains that she was not a god, but a woman who lived a sad and horrible life and died trying to change the world.
I mean, not inaccurate, but yeah, kind of dark.
This upsets Hugo Devil, who wants Zachary to kill her for sacrilege, and also maybe because he finds her hot. Hugo Devil's motivations here are not very well established.
Yeah, I sort of interpret it as that old Georgie was like, you're only, working with her because you find her hot. But, maybe we should, resist her. They might be trying to form some sort of invasion or something like that. So you can't let your thing with your dick. Stop it, guy. Kill her.
Yeah, I kind of read, I mean, this is probably larger discussion stuff, but I always read the Hugo Weaving character. Like, I know there's some sort of thing where it's like a soul version of Hugo Weaving. But I always read it as kind of like Zachary's inner anxiety and depression sort of going on that's sort of been given voice by this devil creature. And it's all just kind of a manifestation of Tom Hanks' own anxiety. And so he's sort of like, oh, is it just because I have feelings for her that I'm willing to sort of give up my beliefs for this woman? And which kind of plays.
Which is kind of why I have more criticism of it, but we'll get to that in a minute.
Yeah.
Zachary fights off the devil voices, and they use the mountaintop transmitter to send a distress call for Earth.
Space lasers!
They return to the village to find it burned, and Zachary's kin all killed by the cannibals. He finds one sleeping, and despite the third of these super accurate predictions that have all worked out so far was about not killing his sleeping enemy, he does this.
Well, hopefully this is not going to turn out horribly.
I mean, it makes sense.
I think it's a good one for the, free will discussion.
Yeah, exactly. And also, it plays well after, he just sees his entire family slaughtered. I mean, I'd want to cut Hugh Grant's neck as well.
After this, he finds his niece still alive, but before they can escape, the cannibals return to look for their now dead companion, which gives away their position. This forces Zachary and his niece to run away, eventually winding up in the same small clearing where he watched his brother-in-law killed earlier. He is about to meet exactly the same fate when Miriam rises up from behind the rock that he was previously hiding behind and begins shooting. With her super future gun and him to aid her, they do defeat all the cannibals despite having a couple of injuries, including a scar on Zachary's face.
And Mionim gets a nasty crossbow bolt to the leg, I believe.
The Prescients agree to let Zachary and his niece live with them since their village was destroyed. And years later, we're back to where the movie began, with old Zachary telling stories to a group of children. As he looks up at the sky, we see that he also has a comet-shaped birthmark on the back of his head. When he finishes, one of the children asks him where Earth is, and he points out a small blue star.
Little blue pale dot.
Also, it turns out he and Halle Berry got together, but you saw that coming.
Yeah, it wasn't exactly so.
They're like grandparents now and all that.
I will say, Tom Hanks' old man makeup works here. Halle Berry's totally does not.
No.
She looks so decrepitly old. I'm like, oh, wow. How are you standing?
Well, they do mention throughout this section of the movie that there's radiation, things like that the prescient folks can't tolerate, but the Valley people can. And so, maybe she just got more exposure and it just sort of caught up with her.
Sure, we'll go with that.
Well, that was Cloud Atlas, as I hope it made some sort of sense, because...
I'm just glad we made it through. It was quite a lengthy synopsis. Like I said,
Yes.
I'm very sorry for making you go through all of that.
Yeah, this is a 3-hour movie, so getting it down to 40 minutes is fine.
Our telling it to you in the audience here is not going to be a complete experience. I highly recommend you actually see this movie for yourself, so you get the full what's going on here.
All the climaxes happen at the same time. All the thematically similar bits happen at the same time. It's not one movie after the other.
And no, there's some really great like cross-cutting, like I'm trying to remember off the top of my head. There's the bit where like Halle Berry falls in the water, and then there's like other characters that are like dealing with water at the same time, and it's just the editing job on this is just purely for the editing alone. It's a phenomenal achievement.
I know. Doing all the editing for several shows, I cannot imagine trying to work on this thing.
Oh yeah, no, it would have been, it must. I mean, I'm sure it's a lot of it's in the script, but whoever the editor was on this, don't have in front of me, but whoever the editor was on this deserves a ton of props.
Perhaps even mad props.
Mad props, I say, yes.
I unfortunately had to leave out a scene because it's not real, as far as I can tell, where it's thematically important for Frobisher and Sixsmith's bit, though, where near the end, they are both smashing up china in a shop, which is why I can only assume it wasn't really real. Where Frobisher talks about how limitations are things that we only adhere to because we can't figure out how to get around them yet.
There's a lot of like really just beautiful moments, and also I should say that like we mentioned in the synopsis that thematic things that tie through, and also like physical stories that could have carried through every story. But there's also just great moments where they echo to each other. Like I believe. The doctor, the composer, again, I'm terrible with names, but the guy that Frobisher works for, he has a dream of his future self, his future soul, in the nursing home, and he hears the Cloud Atlas sextet, which then influences them actually making it. So it's just these weird, like, back and forth. It's not just a straight line, but also things echo backwards as well.
No, this is 100% unimportant, but it bugged me that it was called a sextet just to tie in with the 6 stories, even though it's obviously not scored for a sextet.
Gotta have the theme,
Well, maybe the original scoring was for sextet, but anytime actually someone played it, they changed it up or something. So it's like the edited version. Oh God.
I think I would rank this with like my feelings on basically all of the Wachowskis' films, which is they did something really, really ambitious, tied in a lot of philosophical themes that basically are like, hey, I'm better than you, look at our philosophy. And unfortunately did make 1 or 2 like movie making errors that I don't know how anyone else would have not made given the material, but it's still like unfortunately detracts from the film overall, even though they always are just masterful at filmmaking itself. The story decisions sometimes get a little iffy.
Yes, exactly. And like I said at the top, like this movie is, if I sat down and had to pick like what I thought was the best science fiction film, this probably would not make that. Maybe not even my favorite, but it's one that I always appreciate films that like take big risks and try to do something new, and I'll always take a film that just takes these big risks and doesn't always achieve them over something that's just like, oh, let's do something, the same, or something a little bit simpler. And so I just, that's particularly why I wanted to talk about this film, because I think there's just so much to talk about, both in its successes and in its failures, and I just think it's a particularly fascinating piece of work.
In fact, it's kind of a itself is its message. It is pushing the limits. It is trying to test those boundaries and seek something beyond the normal experience. And
there's just so many movies. What the Wachowskis are so good at doing, at least for me, is they're so good at just making you feel the emotion of a moment. Like for all their other flaws, and you can get into like deep drill down to the flaws, there are so many moments in this movie when I'm just sit back and watching it that I feel what they're trying to come across. Like I feel the emotional swells that they're trying to make me hit. And it's something that like I feel across all of their work, especially their later work like this one, and then Sense8. There's just so many scenes in that show as well where I'm just caught up in the emotional moment, and in the fact that they're able to tie those emotional moments into philosophical ideas is truly a testament to what I think really makes them work. And for all their flaws, I think that is a amazing skill for them as filmmakers.
Well, I feel like since we do have a lot to talk about, we may as well jump into some of the philosophy since they very explicitly reference it.
Yep, of course.
The main thing that this movie deals with and references several times is a philosophical concept called eternal recurrence or the eternal return, which pops up in a lot of cultures. It was a theme in ancient Egypt and ancient Indian religions. The main time we encounter it in what you would traditionally call Western philosophy is ancient Greece, with Platonic ideals and his idea of the immutable human soul. So in ancient Greek philosophy, nothing can change, flat out. So to get around the fact that stuff obviously changes, Plato had the idea that for people at least, you have you, which is your changing inferior body that's going to fall apart and goopify eventually, and you have you, the human soul, or whatever the Greek equivalent was, I don't think soul was a word yet, in which does not change and remains the immutable you forever and ever and ever.
And you could even tie it into science as well, where they have the idea of energy is not created or destroyed, but merely just changes form. So I mean, it appears in pretty much everything.
There's a absolute something that is existing, and that may be reflected in reality in different forms, but the ultimate essence of it is still preserved.
Exactly.
Yeah, and you get into a scientific explanation when you hit Nietzsche, because he was still using an old version of physics before we had relativity and quantum theory, where if you have infinite time and infinite space and infinite stuff in that space, it becomes a mathematical certainty that things will repeat exactly infinitely. Though that's also been disproven mathematically, so it depends on which proof you want to go with.
Yeah, there is, I guess, sort of interpretations of quantum mechanics that even with just the vacuum, that could still be a case in the ultimate long term, even if we have the cosmos is ripped apart under a big rip sort of situation. That there would be still a minute chance that every single thing could be brought back into existence for even just a moment, and sort of once again a recurrence of those things, and then quickly destroyed because the universe is destroying itself with the process. But
all this has happened before. All this has happened again for Battlestar Galactica fans.
Yeah, just this quantum future version is just going to be a little more confusing about it.
Yes.
I feel like since I almost majored in math, I should point out that there is, in fact, just a very simple proof of three wheels that all start spinning at the same time, but are spinning at like ratios of speed in relation to one another, that even though they are all turning infinitely, they will never return to the same positions exactly the same way again. So depends on which version you want to go with.
Well, way to ruin my philosophy with math,
Yeah. Personally, I do lean towards once something has changed, it will never be again.
I mean, for me personally, I kind of like that. I mean, it speaks to me in that sense of like all this kind of recurs and everything will sort of happen again, and that I may not necessarily believe in like one soul, but I do believe that themes keep recurring and patterns keep recurring, and that's just sort of for me, especially within human society. So. Oh
yeah, most certainly. I think to quote, I think it was George Lucas here, history might not repeat itself, but it does rhyme.
Exactly.
Well, I think it's kind of telling that the story themes decided to start themselves in 1840s when you started with an incredibly exploitive system. Like the entire overarching theme of this is that like humanity will basically always feed on itself to enrich some while destroying others, and that's going to eventually lead to your own downfall.
Exactly.
And it started during a time period where that was particularly egregious in Western civilization. And as we've talked about before, while all of human history has included some form of slavery, only the Roman Empire and then later on the Western, more modern slave trade could count as like the horrific slavery that we associate it with it now.
You are our property, and we can do anything we want with you. Torture you, could kill you, and there's going to be no repercussion for us because we have built this system in order that we are ultimately overseeing you and controlling you.
And those are the systems that we were calling, as anyone who listened to our previous Roman episode, is slave societies, where the majority of the wealth of the society comes from this exploited underclass, which, though we got rid of slavery in most of the developed world, is something that especially Marxist would argue is still happening, just in a more consumerist capital framework.
I mean, that's the recurring theme throughout like all of these stories. There are always those systems of exploitation and oppression in every version of this, in every story that's been going on. Some of it expressly capitalist, like particularly science fiction-y one where they're in Tokyo, and then also sort of the Halle Berry-led story.
The 70s, yeah.
Yes, the 70s story.
Plant.
Yeah, I'd argue that all of it is explicitly capitalist until you get to the fall of society. Because even in your comedy storyline in the middle, Cavendish's brother directly references that he owns this elder care facility because people will pay him a great deal of money to pawn their relatives off on him.
Yeah, and also, well, Cavendish is also, he's a distributor. He's a book distributor, and sort of he is profiting off of, this critic getting very brutally murdered. He's directly...
The author goes to jail, and he's just kind of like, well, I guess I get all the money then.
Exactly.
No, I was trying to square this in my head because I was reading a good deal of reviews for this movie to try to get a feel for things. Mm-hmm. And I feel like it kind of has a couple of competing themes, and I can't decide whether they're intentional or not. Because the overarching story seems to be sort of this almost hopeful thing that through our human connections in this long arc of history will, wind up in a better place in the end. But the theme of the eternal recurrence happening throughout every timeline, you wind up at the end with they're in space now, and it seems like everyone's happy and okay, but the only thing we can conclude from the previous stories is in 100 years or so, it's all going to be junk again.
That's a little depressing.
It is depressing, but I kind of like that theme, and this is something that I've been, thinking about as someone who likes to talk about social issues and social problems, because there tends to be this apathy that gets created that I've seen come up with a lot of people. They're just like, oh, well, yeah, that's just the way it is, and it's never going to change, and so why bother? And I think, for me, what this film is trying to say is that, yes, these systems constantly do appear and constantly get created to sort of exploit and oppress an underclass, or whatever class that happens to be at the time, whether it's people of color or clones or what have you. But it's just as important to constantly fight against that and fight to stand up for those people. And it's there's that Martin Luther King quote that I think is also stolen from elsewhere, but it's the arc of justice is long but bends towards justice, or something along those lines.
The arc of history.
Arc of history, yes, thank you.
Bends towards justice.
Yeah, and it's, you could say that everything just keeps ending in horrible crap, but then there's also these moments of beauty and success, and I like that the film sort of ends on this sort of tying together, like, it doesn't end with all these characters ultimately succeeding. And, there's, like, moments of success, and clearly there's, like, a hopeful end towards all of these stories, but it's always just the bit right before we see we never actually see the full revolution. We don't see the ending of slavery at the beginning. We just see a character going off to, like, I'm going to join the abolitionists. We see the clones start to rise up. We get the hints of that. And it's all about, like, that spark, that need, that drive to want to make things better is just as important as recognizing that these systems of oppression do constantly come back.
Yeah, I think that's what bugged me a little bit, because even with the apathy stuff, I still feel like there's a really good point to be made in sometimes having ideals and fighting for them, even though you know you have very little chance of achieving anything, is the point.
Yes.
I kind of wish that it had been expanded on a little more in the stories, because I kind of got this impression that the themes that the book was going for than the source material, and the themes that they wanted to put into the movie, being the Wachowskis, kind of fought each other a little bit. Because the author of the book comes out several times in interviews and says that this is a book about how humanity is never really going to change and is just eating itself from the inside. And they put in these themes of like, but also fight oppression and do what you can. And I feel like that took too much of a back seat, at least for me, even though I think it's a really good point that could have been expanded on a little more.
Yeah, no, I totally agree with that. I don't know, I tend to like works that make me feel like a desire to do something at the end. And, like I said at the top of this section, there are many times throughout this film where I am able to just dive into the emotion that this movie is trying to make me feel, regardless of its flaws. And the end of this movie just makes me want to I want to go out and I'm inspired and hopeful. And, I think it's, the whole film is just sort of laying out how these systems work and how people sort of get inspired to fight back against them. And then it makes me sitting here when I watch the film being like, yeah, I can become part of that. And I think, to a degree, there's like a call to action at the end of this film that I think if you had just shown, and again, this is why it works for me and I can totally see it not working for you, that, just showing like, oh yeah, here's where they could have succeeded. Here's where they could have, here's how they could have won. It wouldn't have been such a strong call to action at the end. It leaves you feeling like, yeah, I want to go out and make that happen.
Yeah, they always go through this interesting arc of why each of these characters becomes a revolutionary. Instead of going to, here is a revolutionary and we're going to follow them through their being a revolutionary.
Yeah, it's all about the pivot point where they sort of go from, well, I'm kind of going through these motions in my life, this is sort of what I'm expected, to, no, something needs to change, so I'm going to take action.
And I also like that there's the, going back to this eternal recurrence idea, that it's all, a lot of their impetus towards wanting change is always informed by the previous story, or at least it has elements of that previous story that sort of informs where they're going and kind of ties in this idea, like, even if we removed the idea of a human soul that just continues throughout this, like a direct, like, this soul is this soul is this soul is this soul, which is another thing we can talk about, because that does get also a bit muddled in a little ways by the birthmark and then who's playing who. But even if you took that out and sort of removed this idea of a direct human soul, it's sort of this idea of that human history just builds upon itself, and that, we're always sort of taking from the past to try and inform the future. And yeah, that works in an oppressive way, but it also works in a way of like being inspired towards action, towards fighting back. And I kind of like that sort of through line comes through.
Yeah, fighting the good fight on the shoulders of giants, in a way.
Exactly, yeah.
Yeah, and this is a point that was made before by some other people, so I'm not claiming to be original, but even the Cavendish storyline, his kind of dumb, like, presented as kind of dumb, because elder abuse is not something that we should take as comedy all the freaking time, and it was bugging me slightly, but his presented as comedic escape from this nursing facility is, like, later used as the impetus for a character to try to enact larger change after the fact.
And like, you could even put that as like a meta commentary on the effects of cinema and fiction to want to create that change as well. Sort of like a meta commentary on what this film itself is trying to be.
Yeah, and it's not really explicitly stated in the film, but each character encounters the previous character's writings or art or work somehow, and it's always at least mildly fictionalized.
It's another thing I want to sort of touch on myself is the versions that each character encounters of the previous story is the version that they are being exposed to is not going to necessarily be the version that we're seeing in the movie. And so we could potentially very much, have a whole question of, okay, which part of these is being presented as the truth of this reality, and which ones are just the impressions of they are being exposed to in the next iteration.
It makes me think, to tie it into Star Trek a little bit, because why not? Of like, of like how we, aggrandize these creators and kind of ignore their flaws or heighten their flaws, depending, without recognizing that these people were just, good and bad at the same time. And we just sort of take the pieces of them that inspire us and make us want more, but then how that can also be ultimately problematic. Like we had, I forget her name, but the Zachary's people view her as a god, even though, she ultimately had flaws herself. And to tie it back into Star Trek, the point I was trying to make is like, look at someone like Gene Roddenberry, who ultimately was a very flawed creator, but he did create Star Trek, which has some really wonderful and beautiful philosophical ideas. But, today we tend to be either, Gene Roddenberry was a hack writer, or Gene Roddenberry was, this perfect great bird of the galaxy whose ideas are enshrined in perfection, without like realizing he was a flawed man who, made some great stuff, made some bad stuff. But ultimately, in the end, his works inspire people to do better for the most part, and take from that what you will.
It's easier to argue about the ideal version of someone than it is the real person.
Exactly.
That actually ties in. I feel like they might have cherry picked some of their philosophy in this a little with with how they have certain characters who are just always evil throughout everything. Well, I found another Alexander Solstin quote when I was looking up his work that I thought was good and worked for this theme. If only it were so simple that there are evil people somewhere inconspicuously committing evil deeds, and it were only necessary to separate them from the rest of us and destroy them. But the line dividing good and evil cuts straight through the heart of every human being, and who is willing to destroy a piece of his own heart? That's
a great quote. I really love that. I like that theme in a lot of things. Like a lot of the videos that I do on my channel are technically the truth is a lot more complicated than it's, good, bad. There's not a good thing or bad thing. It's like things are in the middle somewhere, and that's what makes them both interesting but also difficult to parse out. And yeah, I think that's part of what's interesting about this film, but also part of the flaws of it, because they do kind of present Hugo Weaving as like this, and to an extent Hugh Grant as like this continual evil force that just exists inside all of us throughout the whole thing. But I think to a degree it works, especially for me in the Zachary part. And I know, Gepwin, you had issues with it, but it plays there as like, oh, Hugo Weaving is this internalized, the struggle that's been internalized within Zachary's character, and that I don't actually think that Hugo Weaving's character exists in that story, but it's just a playing out of Zachary's own internalized struggle with evil and fear and depression. And I think that kind of plays into that whole idea of the good versus evil within us.
Yeah, and that worked pretty well, except for I wish they had done any kind of explanation for that character at all, because I thought it was like a good guy for a bit, because he shows up and saves Zachary from being eaten by cannibals.
Yeah.
And then later they're like, that was bad. It's like, was it though? Because hiding was the right decision.
Well, if he popped his head out, he might have been able to save them, maybe? Or at least have perished alongside fighting against the cannibals.
Well, that's the thing, is I get, psychologically you would feel incredibly guilty in that circumstance.
Yes.
So, if they'd explored that anymore, you could have gotten something through that. And when he's see, the thing with Hugo Weaving Devil being, his internalized stuff, I feel like that's accurate for what they're doing, but the way they presented it was just a little off for me, and I felt flatter than I wanted it to, which is kind of my criticism of everything in the movie. It's I wish you'd handled this better, because it could have been good.
Yeah,
when he's doing the tempting stuff, it's you should drop that rope, and then he's just quiet. It's like, drop it, drop it, drop it. And then he doesn't. And that's the entire thing. There's no kind of like, you should drop it. It's like, but no, she'll die or whatever. Like, there's no actual discussion. He's just going like, do it, do it, do it, do it, do it. And then he doesn't. And that's the whole thing.
Well, my sort of interpretation of the character is that it's not necessarily just a pure, this is my evil side. It's more of this is my self-interest inside. And so, when it's like, oh, there's the cannibals are running, this part of me is going to say, go hide. When he's struggling to hold the rope and his hands are bleeding, that hurts a lot. And so he's, it's like, okay, I can, drop it. And here are the excuses to do it. Just so, just let her fall. You'll be fine, right? And then, later when, he's sort of concerned about, it's like, oh, they're trying to send a message. What's this all about? Is this maybe some trouble for us? They never tell the truth. Maybe I'm going about this whole situation in a way that's, maybe not serve my own interests here. Maybe I should go and kill her and be done with it.
Yeah, and I really love that scene with him at the moment where Halle Berry's sort of challenging his religion, because, I mean, that scene in particular, for me, ties into the whole theme of it. If we read Hugo Weaving Devil as his sort of internalized self-interest, it kind of dramatically plays out what a lot of these storylines have been playing. It dramatically plays out an internal struggle that has been playing out externally everywhere else, in the sense that, like, this is the moment where Tom Hanks, Zachary, can choose to continue this system of, suppression of knowledge, like suppressing, knowledge, and just keep on going with this religion. And I almost wished his religion had been shown to be a little bit more actively oppressive at times. It's played a little less, a little bit more ambiguously, but it's a nice internal discussion of, like, he could choose to continue this cycle, or actually listen and be like, no, I'm going to allow my ideas to be challenged. I'm going to allow myself to maybe accept that my views and beliefs aren't wholly accurate. And I think that that's a struggle that, a lot of people, especially, given today being so polarized, that's a lot of something that a lot of us could learn from, being like, oh, it's not just simple as, I'm right, they're wrong, but it's like saying, maybe the truth is somewhere in the middle. And it takes a lot of self-work to say, I might be wrong. I might be making a mistake here, to just preclude any discussion.
The religion thing in that segment was kind of just, it had some symptomatic stuff of kind of a limitation of the things that they could do, trying to tell 6 stories at the same time. Yeah. Because you don't get anything except, like, oh, this person who was trying to be an inspiring force for change earlier got deified. I wonder how that happened. Also, obviously, whatever she was trying to do didn't work because, apocalypse happened.
Yeah.
Maybe it was somebody else's fault for that.
We don't know how pious everyone is, or how important this religion is to him. Generally, like, you have to fill in a lot of holes for it to make any sense at all. And I feel like I think that's what gets it a little bit muddled when you're trying to work out themes like that. Because I think that's a perfectly legitimate reading of, like, this is him having to question his beliefs, but, what are those beliefs and how do they tie into this and how are they different than this?
Touching on what you just were talking about there, like the flaws of this piece, and we kind of just danced around a lot of the flaws too, just to talk about the theme. But this easily could have been, a 5-hour film.
Yeah.
Yeah, we could fill in all these gaps just with more material, but... Yeah.
And, I think Sense8, to a degree, kind of plays with a lot of similar concepts and works better there because it's a longer film. Because that series is all about, as well, like, telling multiple different stories that cross-cut and interact with each other. It's a very similar setup that I feel like this is sort of the proto version of that the themes that they later are more fully able to flesh out later on. So it's interesting to sort of draw a parallel between those two shows. But dealing with this work in and of itself, like, yeah, there's a lot of flaws because that I think are just born out of the fact that there's only so much time that you can really give to each of these stories to really flesh out the ideas that they're trying to show.
Yeah, which is why I'm not necessarily leveling it as a criticism at them.
No, but it's a worthwhile criticism.
And I do think if we're bringing up criticisms, we've been kind of half mentioning it, but there is the makeup thing that we should probably not ignore, at least.
Yes.
Yeah.
So Yellowface.
Yeah.
Yep.
To put it the most blunt way possible.
Everyone in the near future place they call Neo Seoul, which you can only assume is in Korea. Every actor is in it's not even just bad yellow face makeup, like it's horrifically bad yellow face makeup.
Mm-hmm.
It doesn't even look the least bit anything.
It's like it's like you're wearing a mask. This is the best way I can sort of describe it.
And I also think, I get what they were trying to go for with that. Like this, again, continuation of souls that transcend, gender and race. And to a degree, there is also a problem. I think they get away with it because they are transgender, and I praise it myself. But, there is also something to be said about, guys playing girls as well, and the sort of implication it has for the transgender community when you do something like that. I think it's a little less problematic because they aren't trans. They're playing women. They're playing cis women. But
and they do that both directions in this movie, because they do have, like, Susan Sarandon shows up briefly in that section playing a male scientist. Doesn't have any lines, but they do it in both ways.
I think Halle Berry also appears in Whiteface at one point, I believe.
Yes, which was interesting because, like, that makeup was good enough I didn't notice it the first time through.
Yeah, I know. That's why I'm always like, what, did that happen or did that not happen? I had to remember.
Yeah, she plays Vivian's wife, Jocasta.
Yes. Yeah. And also the I'm blanking on her name. Why am I terrible with names? The Asian woman. She also plays the white wife of the Ewing in the first story.
And I did think that was interesting because they have a couple times where they have a non-white character done up in white makeup, and every time they make them a super, super pale redhead.
Yeah. The most stereotypical, ginger white person, I guess you could make.
Now, Adam's wife, Tilda, was played by Donna Bay.
Yeah, that's what I was, yeah.
Yeah, Donna Bay played Adam's wife, and then Halle Berry played Vivian's wife.
But yeah, I guess going back to what we were trying to say is I get that they wanted to sort of say, like, oh, the human soul transcends gender and race and sexuality and all these things that we sort of place these systems of oppression on. Like oppression, like these systems work based on race, based on gender, based on, sexuality, all these different things, but ultimately that doesn't matter because it's just a human soul, and we get that through the actors playing different parts. And so I understand that, and I understand why they wanted to do that, which is why it makes it so complicated, because it's
how do you do something like this without doing this exactly.
But then there's just the the historical implications of doing Yellowface.
But there's not even any particular reason that those characters needed to be Asian the way they were showing it, because it's like future super globalist society. And
exactly.
even if they gave them more Asian sounding names, which would still be its own problem, there's no reason they needed to do the makeup on them.
Yes, and make it so stereotypical too.
Yeah. So I see that one I see the criticisms on. I'm like a super cis dude, so I don't have the like background to comment well on the men playing female characters. And
I'm white, so there's only so much I can really articulate about Yellowface as well.
So for that section, I'm banging down to I'm definitely taking a lot of influence in the research I did from people who are in those communities who had a lot of criticisms of the yellow face in this movie, not the least of which was they did like white people playing Asian people, but they somehow had the wherewithal to avoid blackface entirely. Which good.
At least they got that something right.
Yeah. That's very, very good. I'm not saying they should have, but it does show an awareness that it would be a problem in one place without the same awareness of it being a problem in another.
Partially good, yeah.
It's partially good, and again, this being couched in, I'm a white person, but I'm also wondering about like the historical basis for that, because one thing that I remember reading about and finding interesting was back when Ghost in the Shell was coming out. And Scarlett Johansson was playing a white woman who is an Asian character. And there's some sort of meta-commentary within the movie itself, but just taking that at face value. That I remember hearing interviews with people who lived in Japan who were talking about this movie, and they were like, oh, we didn't even realize that was an issue, that was a problem. because Japanese culture that sort of issue of yellowface isn't a big discussion point. And if you look at anime, especially like what Ghost in the Shell is based off of, they're usually the characters are played or drawn to be sort of ambiguous with their racial identity. Anyways, but obviously Yellowface is has such a long historical, and Blackface even more so, has such a long, really horrific legacy here in America that it just plays differently.
Yeah, those are both Western issues, because if you are in an area of the world that is predominantly Asian, of course you're not going to be dealing with anti-Asian racism in the same kind of way. Now you had, in that kind of thing, you have some similar kinds of problems with the way that Japanese cinema handles Korea, which has a particular history in a similar kinds of themes. So you can find parallels, just the fact that they aren't the exact same parallels that people try to use to confuse things.
Yeah, and so I wonder, it makes the yellowface in this film all the more, I just saying interesting, even just to use that word, just because the Wachowskis have been so associated with Japanese culture and anime as well. The Matrix itself is drawing off of Ghost in the Shell and Speed Racer as well, and a lot of their work is very drawn to Japanese culture specifically. And so it's interesting that they decided that they could do the yellowface in this film, having been so associated with that culture, and or being so, I guess I shouldn't say associated, being so inspired by that culture.
Yeah, I think it's the same kind of thing we've been talking about, where I feel really bad that it detracts so much from the film, because it would have been a better film without it. But yes. I don't think at least for my viewing, and I completely appreciate people who are more directly affected by this are going to have different experiences. For my viewing, it didn't completely ruin the movie for me, though I completely understand why it would.
Yeah.
It's creating a sense of unease.
And I've seen some theorizing that sense of unease is intentional, like the way that you have obviously the same actor playing different people, and the horrific way that they do some of the makeup is an intentional othering so that you will pay more attention to the overall story arc rather than getting directly invested in each individual piece of it.
Definitely a possibility, but then, yeah, it just delves into this whole rabbit hole of is that very cinematic choice worth, possibly alienating, people in the audience who might be more offended by that?
I think this gets into a thing that I wanted to bring up a little bit, just because it lets me talk about noetics again, which I always love doing, as Isaac knows.
Go for it.
This movie, at its core, is dealing with a pretty simple theme. Kind of the basic message that it's getting across is the kind of hopefulness that you've talked about. Everyone's connected, and trying to make things better is a very worthy thing to do. And when you're dealing with these really, really simple things, you get into something that people call a simple truth, which gets into this interesting field of study called noetics, which is a noetic sense is when you know something that's very, very simple, but you know it in a completely core kind of emotionally connected way. So it makes it a much more powerful experience than it would if you just kind of looked at it intellectually.
So we were talking about emotional connections, so...
Yeah, a kind of prime example of this is there's kind of the stereotypical thing with hippie culture, where you just have love is everything, which intellectually you can look at that and go yeah, sure, fine. But if you get that kind of revelation that people get through either religious experiences, sometimes kind of drug-influenced experiences in some cultures, and you internalize it in what's a noetic way, it becomes an incredibly powerful thing that it just isn't if you were only experiencing it intellectually.
Yeah, no, that's actually super cool, because I think that's what the Wachowskis are so good at, is telling these big philosophical ideas in a way that feels very emotional. I think the only one where it's a lot of pure philosophy is the Matrix, and especially the later two Matrix films, but especially in this one, like I was saying earlier, is like I really do feel part of the reason that I love this movie is I do just feel that swell of emotions several times throughout this film and just get so excited and I guess like euphoric is I guess the best word.
That's kind of like its greatest weakness and its greatest flaw in some ways, because when you're dealing with something really simple that needs to hit you with that core emotional message, for me, some of it got lost because I was taken out of it a little bit by a couple of the kind of storytelling weirdnesses. So it's going to be one of those, it hits you really well or it doesn't kind of things.
So I guess this either working perfectly or not working at all is kind of what happened to a lot of the critics and things like that of the movie itself, in total. And so there's very clearly in the data this very huge divide between the two, where people connect with it totally, and and then those it's like Yeah. I lean towards the more connecting myself. So
yeah, no, and like I said earlier, I think that the failures of this film is probably what led the Wachowskis to try and be more direct in addressing those problems in Sense8, which I feel is like very much a response to the flaws of this work. I mean, in that show, the basic conceit, so spoilers, I mean, it's not a major spoiler, it's in like the first episode or two. But the basic conceit of that is that there are these groups of people that are able to share consciousness across their bodies. So there's like 8 people who across 8 different cultures. Like one's an Indian woman, one's an Asian woman, one's a trans woman, one's a gay man living in Mexico. So just tons of different people living in different cultures are able to share bodies and share minds and sort of reach out across the world. And so that then they're able to say like, hey, look, this, white cop from Chicago is able to then inhabit the body of an Asian woman. And it plays less problematically because then you can just have, the white dude just playing the scene as himself, but you get the idea that it's like he's in the body of the Asian woman.
Some of the series I've seen was like, I think it was someone like, it was like in prison and they were getting a little roughed up, and one of the other people came in and started fighting right back because like they knew how to fight.
And so yeah, I think that show, not to get too in the weeds on that show, I think that show is just them directly trying to address some of the flaws and problems that came up in this film. And like I think it's a really intriguing and intelligent way to sort of comment on this work. So I almost feel like, I mean, this work should be taken in and of itself and discussed in and of itself, but I think it's a worthwhile discussion to anyone who's also seen Sense8 to sort of put it in conversation with this film.
This film is connections over time. That one's connections over space.
Exactly.
I think you've basically convinced us that we should go watch Sense8 now.
Yeah, you should. Sense8 is fantastic. I adore it. There's also flaws in that film as well. I think one being the way it's wrapped up, and then one where it's this very thoughtful piece, a very emotional piece, and then they have like these really off-putting, like the violence in it is so over the top that it's somewhat distancing. You're like, whoa, okay, that's very Matrixy. But so there are problems in that show as well. But I think they use it as a very interesting critique of this film and sort of further push the themes of this film in a way that they just have more time to deal with.
Now, we unfortunately could probably keep going with this discussion for another hour, but since this is already a long episode, it's probably time to move on. So if nobody else had anything they wanted to bring up...
I do. So, nuclear power.
We can't get nuclear power on Lince without the physicist chiming in.
Yes. So, it's real quick. I did want to point out that you sort of mentioned the anti-nuclear power environmentalist stuff and all that, but a lot of that didn't really become, I guess, super popular until around about the 3 Mile Island nuclear disaster, which takes place 6 years after that portion of the film here. So it was sort of, this is sort of a prequel to that actually thing that happened. So I thought that was interesting.
And when did Chernobyl also take place?
I believe late 80s. I should remember the date.
Yeah, no. I've just been doing such a deep dive on Chernobyl recently because of the show, and I've like got really into reading all those books, and it was just fascinating.
86 looks like, yes.
Which would have then made this entire conspiracy pointless.
It's like, oh, well, they did our work for them.
I guess our work here is done. Well, you haven't done anything. Toodles. I just want to sort of draw that together there. But anyway, yes, where we're going now. Where we're going now.
Yes, since this is already a bit of a long episode, I think it's time for the Galaxy's favorite game show.
Yay! Woo!
Hey everybody, welcome to the game show portion of the show, where we tally up all the points, and holy smokes, we got a lot of characters, a lot of points. That's gonna be a little hard for me to figure out which ones are gonna be going first here, but I think we're gonna start with this one here. We got, I think, 6 awards at the moment to be handing out prizes for. So the first one is the Group Project Award, which goes to Vivian Ayers for wanting to take some credit, no, shared credit, no, all the credit for the Cloud Access Sextet. Who's got a prize for Vivian here?
Oh, I think Vivian should get tenure and a buttload of grad students so that he doesn't have to blackmail people for credit. He can just steal credit academically like normal people.
Oh, I actually have seen this happen, yes. Anyway, moving on. Assignment Death. This is the prize award, which is going to Atua for being set to work, that whole plan to the rigging and things like that, and, being threatened with death, but also that whole, Louisa going out there to do what's right and kind of knowing from the get-go that she's probably going to be targeted by somebody. What do they win? Jessie?
Atua should get all of those buttons that Tom Hanks was stealing off of Dr. Ewing the entire movie. And Louisa should get a nice puppy for her work, one that hasn't been shot by Hugo Weaving.
Well, I think the jewelry is available, but it might be on an island. But as for puppies, I think we could all deserve a puppy here. Our third prize is the Slaver's Paradise Award, which goes to Haskell Moore, his associates, and the powers that be in Neo Soul for, kind of the obvious reasons. Also, screw those guys. What do they win, Gepwin?
We've been living most our lives, living in a slaver's paradise.
Is that the single or the album?
No, they win a good old-fashioned uprising, because, if they were doing Neo Soul at least, they're going to quite literally start eating the rich, which I know has become a meme, but it was, some old Marxist stuff we should listen to a little bit more than just memeify and put it back into the big corporate glob that's become the internet that destroys hopes and dreams.
Yeah, let's not commoditize the revolution, friends. Comrades, let's actually internalize this stuff and think about it. Anyway, moving on, the next prize is the I'm a Humanitarian prize, which goes to the Kona tribe for their particular taste in food, and the Fabricants due to the systems in place being, causing them to have a certain sort of taste in their diet there in order for them to be good servants for the consumers. What do they win?
They win a lifetime supply of Soylent Green, all coming in juice box form.
I think that will be quite on theme for their taste there.
Especially branded Soylent Green, so it fits in with the consumers.
So Cavendish brand, then.
Exactly.
So just modern Soylent.
Oh, God.
Our fifth prize award here is the Show Within a Show Award, which goes to all the fine actors who starred in the ghastly ordeal of Timothy Cavendish, and maybe also large sections of the movie, maybe? What does everybody in those things win, guys? Gepwin?
I think they all win the Best Supporting Actor, Supporting Actor, Supporting Actor, Supporting an Actor award for just everyone. How did anyone do this?
So is it like a really small Oscar? Or
the tiniest of Oscars. It's like an Oscar Mshushka doll.
It's like one of those toys where you push the bottom and they just deflate the entire time. So it's just an Oscar that you just push the bottom and it just goes blah. Or it could be like a nesting doll where you just open up the Oscar and there's more Oscars inside, just getting progressively smaller.
Which fits really well for this movie.
Yeah, that would be perfect.
But do you get all the bigger ones, or do you have to get them out to your co-hosts or co-stars there?
Well, there are 6 of them, so you just get whatever one you get in order.
That works.
A sextet of Oscars.
Our final prize here is the A Single Word prize, which goes to Adam for saying no to that slavery business, Robert for saying no to his work being stolen and his rights suppressed, Louisa for saying no to that whole suppression of the truth, Timothy for saying, no, you can't keep me here, you assholes. Somni451 for saying no to the horrors of the fabricant slavery, and Zachary for saying no to his dark impulses. Also Mironim for saying, help, with a giant space laser. What do they all win? Jesse?
Trying to think of like a single word to just encapsulate all of it. The true.
The true.
They win the true. or they win that leprechaun's hat, which was particularly enjoyable to watch Hugo Weaving wave around a few times.
I do kind of want that hat. But now they have it. Maybe I'll give them awards later, and I'll try to bribe them for it, because I want that hat now. Anyway, that's all the awards I got here. I'd like to thank all the contestants once more for putting in a fantastic performance and serving the story and the plots and the interlaced madness here all really well. And I'd like to thank my assistants here for once again providing some prizes here. And I'd like to let you guys take it away.
Thanks, Jessie, for more prizes, so I don't have to think of everything. And thanks to all our contestants for sticking around while we humiliate you. We really don't really have a choice because we made you up after the fact. And thank all of you for joining us on the Galaxy's favorite game show.
Woo! Thanks for having me.
So that was Cloud Atlas. Thank you for joining us again, Jessie. Where can people find you and all of your wonderful videos and such likes?
Well, you can find me at Jessie Gender on all the social media platforms. I'm mostly hanging out on Twitter these days. And then you can find most of my actual work at Jessie Gender on YouTube. So I release a new video every single Friday, generally about Star Trek, but not always. The typical theme is talking about social or political issues through pop culture. So yeah, check me out there. Give me a subscribe. Every little bit helps. And if you want to help, me pay the bills and things like that, you can also find me on Patreon.
I'm gonna follow you on the Twitters here.
And go check that out, because those videos are how I found you. They are amazingly well researched and done. I was incredibly impressed.
Thank you.
Highly recommend. I'm still going through your back catalog at this point, but yes, I'm really enjoying them.
Well, I sound much more eloquent when I have, a 10-page script in front of me that I wrote.
Well, for our next non-scripted adventure that Isaac and I will have to take on solo, we are going to be moving on to the third season of Star Trek, the original series, after we take a bit of a break to rest from all the science fiction, and possibly after the holidays, since it's too close to Thanksgiving and Christmas for everyone.
All the things happening suddenly, everything.
Well, enjoy Brain. What is Brain?
Yes, next time we're going to be covering Spock's brain, widely remembered to be the flat-out worst overall of any Star Trek ever.
But, I'm going to do my best to make sure I have something good to say about it,
Yeah, well, we'll have to see, because we've watched a couple of the best of Star Treks ever, and I don't know if I agree with that, so...
I still say Spock's Brain is an enjoyable watch if you look through it through the lens of so bad it's good.
That'll work out. Yeah. I feel like that's a lot of original series, if we're being honest.
Yeah, but it's better than like Turnabout Intruder, where the message is women shouldn't lead starships, and that's just the whole message of that episode.
Yeah.
I'll take that over. I'll take Spock's Brain over that one.
I think I'll say that for that, you should go check out Jessie's video on the history of how Star Trek handles female characters, which was an amazing thing, and we'll handle that a lot better than we can in this outro.
Fair. Well, thank you for the plug.
Yeah. You rock. Gepwin rocks. I sometimes rock. Take it away, Gepwin.
I hope that everyone enjoyed. Again, much thanks, Jessie, for adding some color commentary and added things to this video. I probably would not have watched this movie if you hadn't recommended it, because it's one of those ones that kind of flew under the radar when it came out, even though I was really excited for it.
Yeah, no, it's yeah, like I said, it's far from perfect, but one that I find to be super fascinating just to discuss, as is obvious.
And everyone else can join Isaacs and I next time when we cover original series episode Spock's Brain.
Next time on Watchers of Tomorrow, Spock loses a brain. Uh-oh. You have been listening to Watchers of Tomorrow, a podcast on science fiction media. Find and follow Watchers of Tomorrow on Podbean, YouTube, Spotify, iTunes, Google Play, Stitcher, Pocket Cast, Spreader, Digital Podcast, and perhaps many more to come. If you enjoy our podcast, make sure to subscribe for more. And where possible, make sure to rate your experience or leave us a review. You may find Gepwin on youtube.com/Gepwin and Twitter @Gepwin. You may find me, Dr. Isix, on youtube.com/Dr. Isix and Twitter @IsixLP. Music is Waveform and Mori's Principle, both by DRKRN. You can also check out the Watchers of Tomorrow Discord channel. Make sure to share the experience with your friends, family, enemies, and alien overlords. If you feel you are suffering from transporter syndrome, please be aware that the next time you step off the transporter, that you, that is now, no longer exists.